And here to talk about that interview as well as the state of India-US ties and just what the Americans expect from India, particularly vis-a-vis Iran and other key issues. We have with us this evening K.C. Singh, who's of course a senior former diplomat. Michael Kugelman is joining us from the Wilson Center via Skype in Washington. Seema Siroi, columnist and journalist, joining us from Washington as well. Here in the studio, defense analyst Ajay Shukla and Manoj Joshi, distinguished fellow with the Observer Research Foundation, with us tonight. Michael Kugelman, to you first. Let's first talk about the fact that this 2+2 dialogue, this dialogue between India and the US, was suddenly abruptly postponed with a call from the US Secretary of State to Sushma Swaraj last night. And you were among the first people who tweeted that you felt that it actually shows the sort of low ebb at which the India-US relationship is at the moment. Now, Nikki Haley was at pains there to say that, look, this has nothing to do with India. Prime Minister Modi knows why this dialogue was postponed. But, you know, did you really buy into that? The fact is, this dialogue has been postponed 3 times this year.
Well, absolutely. I think that the optics are extremely suboptimal, to say the least. And, you know, it remains unclear as to why exactly it was postponed for a 3rd time. And there have been a number of reports that it was really a scheduling matter, that essentially Secretary of State Pompeo needs to be at this summit with Russia. You know, if that's the case, I don't think that's a very good excuse. I mean, if the U.S. really does value its partnership with India, which I know it does, why would it then decide to stand India up, so to speak, in favor of Russia and Putin, of all countries? You know, Russia, of course, is a country that you know, the U.S. has had a lot of trouble getting along with. But stepping back for a second, you know, the relationship is certainly in some trouble right now. I'd argue that it hasn't been this tense for several years, but it'll survive. It will be okay. You know, there's enough goodwill in this relationship, and there's also a recognition that there are very deep strategic convergences between these 2 countries, particularly in terms of how they look at the issue of terrorism in South Asia, in terms of how they look at the issue of China and its growing role and presence in Asia. That to me suggests that, you know, eventually these tensions will be weathered, and there have been economic tensions in the past. It's always been the Achilles heel of this relationship, but I think the strength of the defense side of the partnership will ultimately allow the 2 countries to move forward. But absolutely, things are not very good right now. Let's be very clear about that.
Okay, things are not very good right now. Ambassador K.C. Singh, would you agree with that assessment? What's your take on the reason why this dialogue was postponed? Does it look good to stand up India in the way that we were stood up, as Michael Kugelman says?
No, it may be a mixture of factors, but the very fact that Ambassador Haley has been sent to India, she was the point person as far as Iran is concerned, point person as far as the sanctions against Russia are concerned, because there are the international implications of that. And third is, of course, trade matters, which she talked about in an interview. Now, in the past, we could deal with the Iran thing because during President Bush's presidency, that was the only pressure point. With Obama, we had an advantage because he moved towards giving Iran a nuclear deal, so that pressure was lifted. But now we've got 3 different pressure points, so it is not just one. One is the trade issue, second is Russia, and third is Iran. And Iran, there's Russia also, their deadlines which are approaching, and there are acts passed by the US Congress which come into play. So I think the Americans are using the carrot and the stick. And don't forget the UAE foreign minister was here last week. And there's a big thing about them and the Saudis putting up a big refinery. So what the Americans are saying is they sent their allies here that if you need oil, for oil we've got Saudi Arabia, UAE. And today it's a very fragmented GCC, very fragmented Islamic world that you have to deal with. So balancing these relationships is beginning to become a problem for us. And that is why they reach out first to President Xi at the end of April, to Putin at the end of May. I think Prime Minister Modi's realized that this is more than a hug is going to achieve. This balancing is becoming more difficult. And I think, I don't think India is going to, you know, simply toe the US line and become some kind of a US ally. That's just not possible. So I see friction continuing over the next few months.
Let me ask in some more detail then about the Iran issue, Ajay, which is that it seemed very clear from Nikki Haley's comments today that, you know, she said she had a conversation with Mr. Modi about dialing down the relationship with Iran. She's used the word rethink, that we are encouraging India to rethink its relationship with Iran. And the tone seemed to be, well, you know, you just have to do this. It is a difficult tightrope for India, isn't it? And in the end, how do we walk that tightrope?
Oh, well, it's not just Iran, it's with Russia as well.
Yeah.
But I think that while there is an attempt to get India to walk backwards from these relationships, I see also from my conversations with Washington officials that there's an understanding that India will comply only to a limited degree. For example, with Russia, the CAATSA and so on, the agreement on sanctions and the penalties that could be imposed on countries that don't sort of live up to those sanctions, they want India to sort of devalue the defense relationship with Russia. At the same time, they know that there's a very limited extent to which India is going to do it. It's the same with Iran. They are making the right noises. A lot of what you say in international relations is not directed at the country you're saying it to, but at third parties, audiences. So appearing to put pressure on India is also an attempt to squeeze other countries into complying with sanctions, even though they know that India will comply only to a limited degree. So I agree with Michael that the optics are very bad. But I think there's also an understanding that there's an inherent stability in the India-US relationship. It's founded on very good ground, those common values and democracy that they talked about. And despite the inclination of Trump to be very transactional in his relationship, I think there's an inherent stability that will ensure that it will not cause damage beyond a point.
Seema, let me take that to you. What is the view that you're getting from there? You were in a briefing, I believe, where when a senior US official in fact talked about the need for India to stop its oil imports from Iran by the 4th of November. That was the deadline that was given. What was the sense you got? Ajay's sense seems to be that there is an understanding that the Americans have that India will go so far and no further. Did you get that sense too from talking to officials there?
See, the officials here are very clear in imposing the sanctions this time, and there is much less give compared to the Obama administration. So they were very clear that November 4th is the final deadline by which time they want oil imports to come down to zero. It might be a pressure tactic to take such a hard line. And also remember, these were bureaucrats who were talking. Perhaps in interactions at the political level, the messaging would be somewhat different. So I think we just have to wait and see. Right now, they're taking a very maximalist approach in order to push the Europeans, Indians, and the Chinese to respect these sanctions.
So, Manoj Joshi, what do you think? As Michael Kugelman says, things are not at their best right now. What do you think is the fundamental root cause of that? Is it that Trump looks at relationships in a transactional manner? Is it basically the trade relationship, or is it more strategic as well?
Well, you know, I think it's the Trump style. He has very clearly articulated the concept of America first. And I think basically what he's telling Europe, NATO, for example, or what he's telling Japan or Korea, we are the boss. You know, we tell you what strategy is all about, and you better follow us. And I think this is the point in time where this issue is being posed to India, because India and the United States have been, over the past decade and a half, moving towards what we Indians think is a partnership. But I think the United States under Trump has different ideas. Basically, they, I think, probably see us as some kind of a junior ally or a junior partner. Now, I don't blame them, because given the asymmetry, if you are Trump and you're looking, and if you're told to put down the, like a businessman, you say, how much are these guys worth, and what's the comparison? So naturally you say, well, these guys aren't really worth that much, but we do need these guys because there's a balance of power issue. We need them vis-a-vis China. In the Western Pacific Ocean, we need them in the Indian Ocean. They do have a certain value, but the point is we don't have the kind of value which, let us say, Putin has right now in Trump's eyes. So this particular postponement, in my view, is really a reflection of the level in terms of prioritization.
Exactly.
India is not that high. It's important, but not that important.
Actually, the interesting thing is, and I'll ask KC Singh about this, is that there are reports that actually Mike Pompeo is going to go to North Korea next week, which is why they decided to postpone it. So, you know, Michael can hear this, because it's not even Russia. It's, you know, it's that he's probably going to North Korea. What does that tell you, KC Singh, you know, about where in India figures as a priority for the US then?
No, you can see that President Trump has directly invested in that. He had a summit, he met him in Singapore. He thinks that this is going to be a defining element for him in terms of his presidency. If not get him a Nobel Prize, I don't even know if he cares about that. But very clearly he has a different strategic vision of the world. And if you don't fit into that vision, then there's going to be a problem. And within that vision, I don't think he's going to show the kind of tolerance that Obama did or Bush did, and allowed India to find space within which could exist with its traditional relationships in the area with Iran or with Russia or with other countries. There was a period when I think we thought that we could use America now to our advantage in Indo-Pacific, against China, against Pakistan, and so on and so forth. But with Trump, it comes with a cost element. He's broken up the GCC. He says, you want oil, you'll get it from Saudis and Emiratis. They will invest in India. Now, you don't have to go to Iran, so it's zero tolerance. You can't do a bit of this and a bit of that. So I think India will, Prime Minister Modi will find it very difficult in the pre-election year to be seen as very soft and to be submissive to any US requests on this regard. So I see friction developing because he cannot be seen as straying from what is called strategic independence, because that's a given as far as Indian foreign policy is concerned, and he'll be very severely attacked by the opposition. Was he seen as in any way bending to accommodate Americans by distancing himself from traditional relationships?
Ajay, do you disagree with that?
I
why?
tend to interpret this in a different way. I see it as Trump's sort of choices being exercised. On the one hand, there's a crisis situation with Russia. There's a high value negotiation going on with North Korea. And on the other hand, there's a 2+2 dialogue with India, which is going to say the usual things. And sort of at the end of it, it's a reaffirmation of a relationship rather than new ground being broken.
So you understand why they postponed it?
Yes. This is how Trump thinks. A conventional leader might think India is our stable partner, so let's go with this first and let's talk about this first. Trump will think this is where the sort of high value returns are. Let me go to North Korea. We've got a job that's been partially done. Let's push that can further down the road. That's how Trump thinks. He wants to do new things. I don't think that there's any devaluation of the India relationship. If you look at CAATSA, if you look at the Iran sanctions, they are not directed at India. They are directed against Iran and Russia and North Korea, and India is collateral damage. And I think that the United States administration has been trying to mitigate that collateral damage, trying to get waivers for India from those sanctions. This is all rather well known. So I think that, you know, they see the India over here as a reliable partner, but as a partner that does not require a lot of servicing.
You have a different take on that. Seema, let me ask you on Pakistan, since I did ask Nikki Haley about that as well. And, you know, she said the usual thing about how the Trump administration has talked tough, which it has, about the military aid being cut off and how that will continue to remain cut off because there is clearly much more that Pakistan needs to do. But are you getting a sense that the US administration there, even this administration, despite all its tough talk, is falling back into that familiar pattern of how far do we go with Pakistan?
Yes, in fact, I wrote my column exactly on that topic yesterday, that they are so invested in starting the peace process in Afghanistan that pressure on Pakistan has eased somewhat. Yes, the security assistance is still suspended, but at the same time, behind the scenes, the Americans and the Pakistanis have been working together to get the Taliban to the table, etc. And that, for the Trump administration, is a priority, which Lisa Curtis also said in a speech to the U.S. Institute of Peace earlier this month. So I would say that while they are still holding tough on ending the sanctuaries for the Haqqani network and other terrorist groups in Pakistan, there is simultaneously a dialogue going on which is much more engaged than it was earlier this year, when President Trump took a very hard line in that New Year tweet. So yes, that is sounds like, feels like the old movie playing again. But I would still give it some time before saying that they are going soft.
Well, Michael, do you agree with that? Do you see a shift in the position on Pakistan as Seema does?
Yes, I do agree with Seema's position. Look, the U.S. always views its relationship with Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan, and it's always looking to try to get help from Pakistan in some way to help the U.S. carry out its goals there. And I think right now, the U.S. is looking to Pakistan to try to do everything it can to encourage reconcilable elements of the Taliban to agree to negotiations, while at the same time expecting that Pakistan will go after the irreconcilable elements of the Taliban. Now, I think it's a lot easier to expect Pakistan to do the first option than the second, but the bottom line here is absolutely, I think that for all the tough talk that we've heard from the Trump administration, and even after the security freeze, the security assistance freeze, and the really nasty tweet that was issued earlier this year, I don't really necessarily see this administration following up all of this bluster with actual action. I think it also worries about the risk of Pakistan retaliating to a harder U.S. line by closing down the supply lines on its soil, which are critical for the U.S. to get its forces in and out of Afghanistan. So I know that in India, there was initially a lot of, well, not a lot, some levels of optimism that perhaps things could change this time in terms of how the U.S. administration deals with Pakistan. But given how invested everyone, including Washington, is in some type of peace process in Afghanistan, the U.S. will want to try to remain close enough to Pakistan so that it could look to Pakistan to try to help out on that side, even though I'm not sure how helpful Pakistan actually will be.
Well, it does sound like the same old story then. But Manoj Joshi, coming back to Iran, how does India protect its interests vis-a-vis the oil imports, which are important to us? How does India protect its interests in the Chabahar port? I mean, these are important strategic interests for us. And how do we do that now?
Well, I think first of all, India has to decide what kind of a power it is, at what point in the global scales it exists, in the sense if it feels that, yes, you see, because when you hear rhetoric, you hear, India great power, India big power. If you look at the substance of it, yes, certainly we are a big country, we have large interests and growing interests, we are a fast growing economy. We do certainly have interests in the Gulf, and particularly Iran. Most people forget Iran is the closest source of hydrocarbon energy that we have. Large amounts of hydrocarbon energy, Iran is the closest source. Iran has other value. Iran, if you look at the size of Iran, Iran's role in the Middle East, it's a huge country. It's 2/3 the size of India. See, so we have to decide: is this country, Iran, what kind of a relationship do we need with this country? If you look at the Chinese between 2000 and 2014, Iran is the country that has received the highest amount of Chinese aid, even more than Pakistan. They've been investing heavily in that country. Why? Not for the present. They're investing for the future. Here's a resource-rich country, strategically located. So we have to decide if Iran is important for us in our emerging perspective, as an evolving perspective, geopolitical perspective, then we've got to stand by as far as our role is concerned, whether it is with Chabahar, because Chabahar is not just Afghanistan or Central Asia.
Yeah, of course.
Chabahar and Bandar Abbas are also part of our connectivity ideas going all the way to Europe. They are our equivalent of the Belt and Road Initiative. So there are big things which we have to do with Iran. Prime Minister Modi has been pretty skillful so far in dealing with the whole minefield that is the Middle East, which is that he has managed good relations with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, So he's kind of been able to straddle that Shia-Sunni divide. But what we are now facing are very strong headwinds from the United States. And I think it would really require skill. But I think we should draw our red lines very clearly.
I think that's what K.C. Singh is saying as well, that ultimately that the Prime Minister can't seem to be afford to be doing anything else. Quick last comment from all of you on Nikki Haley herself, K.C. Singh. What do you think of her? Do you think she's a potential future Republican leader? I did ask her about that, and she's of course ruling that out. I don't think she would make any public pronouncements yet. But do you see her as potentially someone rising in the Republican Party to run for office?
Well, she's positioned herself very, very cleverly right in the middle of the right-wing party. She's been a governor, and she has gone further than other governors of Indian origin or other politicians of Indian origin. But that really shouldn't matter. I don't think we should see her in that context. But there's one issue which you raised with her which is important, which is the immigration issue. And I see that as another friction point developing. At the moment, there may be only about 100 Indians who are held under subhuman conditions in 2 jails in New Mexico and Oregon. But the way the activism of the ICE in America, the immigration authorities, is there, I wouldn't be surprised if they start picking up more people whose documents are suspect, who have obtained documents giving wrong information. And if the numbers multiply, I see that as a major friction point developing in the future, because she said that we're a country that follows the rule of law. And it's a very conservative Supreme Court in America now. And it's going to back anything that Trump does on the immigration issue. And this I see as a new friction point on the horizon.
Michael, your thoughts on Nikki Haley herself? Do you think she's positioned herself very interestingly vis-a-vis Trump, the White House, holding her own against them as well whenever she's had to?
Oh, yes. I mean, she certainly has positioned herself to do very big things within the Republican Party. I mean, she went from being a governor to all of a sudden being one of the most important people in the Trump administration. But I think the important issue to think about in the context of our discussion now is the very fact that she's been in India over the last few days, the very fact that she's been doing these interviews, including the one that she did with you, talking about how important the relationship with India is. I think that's notable, that even at this very difficult time in the relationship, the fact that she's out there emphasizing how important it is, I think that says something about how this relationship between the U.S. and India is resilient, if nothing else, and that it will weather the storm. And that things could be pretty troublesome right now, but I think putting a top Trump administration official front and center in India doing these interviews, I think that says something about priorities, which emphasize that this relationship will continue to move forward eventually.
All right, well, we leave it there tonight. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Let's see when the India-US dialogue, the new dates for that will finally be announced, and if that finally does go ahead. Thanks very much.